So plan right now is I'm gonna make this code work in game as the first one, and that should also get across the basic steps needed to set up the development environment and stuff like that. Now let's install the template. So I don't need to open Visual Studio actually to install the template. I just have to download the template, then go to this folder path, which is to documents. Then there should be Visual Studio 22 in that template, then project template. We just move this zip here, see if it works. So we start Visual Studio. That's Windows. Now we create a new project. Does the template show up? It does show up, but we shall move ahead with this. This mod will be called my first mod. Okay, it will not go in this directory. It will go in server next directory inside the folder known as my first mod. Obviously, you can name this whatever you want. I'm just gonna select this. I don't actually know what this does, I'll be honest. But I feel like placing things in the same directory is what I want. I don't want a lot of directories. I'm gonna hit create, and the template comes free with the mod class, just what we want. But the template also does not get installed with free references, so you got to do that. What that means is the C# compiler needs to know where all the existing Unity libraries and the modding API are. And if you don't tell Visual Studio that, Visual Studio cannot tell the C# compiler that. And if those files are not there, then the mod cannot be compiled into something that you can actually run. So the first order of business is figuring out how to change the existing path of the references that the template expects you to have. If this was Visual Studio Code, I would just have to edit the CS proj file, but I can't see that. I'm just going to see if I can find it. So one easy way to do that would be just right click the solution, open a folder in File Explorer, which will just show you the CS proj file. And then you can right click it, open it with a editor that actually lets you see the contents, like Visual Studio Code, and then you can change the path. So SF Grenade has added really nice comments, which everybody ignores because they can never find the CS file in Visual Studio itself, because it's like, oh, it's a configuration file. Obviously, a developer shouldn't see it. But anyway, if you use Visual Studio Code, it just shows you the file as text, which you can then edit. So, as the comment says, Hollow Knight refs is the path to your managed directory in Hollow Knight. So, you got to find that now. So, if you have Hollow Knight installed via Steam, then I can show you a relatively easier way to find stuff if I remember it. So, go to your game, right click, manage, browse local files. That should open this folder for you. And the path is going to be different based on your installation, but Inside this Hollow Knight data directory, you will have a managed directory. And you need a path of this directory. Obviously, like I said, the string will be different, but this is the path you need. You also need to make sure that the final slash is present. So we're just going to add that. So just doing that much, Visual Studio is no longer screaming errors at us. I can just go back to this state, save it. Visual Studio is screaming errors at us that it can't find modding, it can't find Unity engine, stuff like that. We give it the right path, and Visual Studio calms down. Step 2. You don't strictly need this step right now, but you will want to have done this now, is to change the path where you want the exported files to be. So this is where the template will generate the final files that you can use to put your mod on mod installer, or share it with your friends, or share it with random people on the internet. Either way, so that's the export directory. What I'm gonna do for now, since I don't exactly know how this template works, is I'm going to give it the same directory I gave it for working, but just make a subfolder in there. So I'm just gonna give it this exports directory. I assume you give it any directory you like, but since I don't know how it is going to generate the final files, will it generate a zip or just the individual DLL files, I'm just gonna give it a random path. What this template will also do is it is also going to install the mod into your current Hollow Knight installation, which means you don't have to copy files yourself every single time that you compile. That will be super helpful. So we're done with all that. So what you want to do instead is you want to go under build and build solution or build my first mod. Both of those will work. You can also just press F6 or Shift F6. Both of those should work. I'm just gonna build solution. That says build succeeded in the corner. With you see in the bottom left that the build has succeeded, and that's your only indication that it's done. So what we got to check next is the build created? In the exports folder that we gave it a while back, we have a folder created with the name of our mod, in which there is the DLL file itself, which is going to be the mod, the zip file, which you can upload to GitHub releases and then put it on mod installer or share it to your friends or whatever, the text file containing the hash of both of these files, which you will need if you want to put it on the mod installer. We will get to that later. But another good thing that this template does for you is, remember that managed folder, that the path we gave it to find the reference to all these library DLLs from Unity and modding API? Well, inside that folder, there is this mods directory, which is where all your mods go. And you will also find the mod we just compiled, my first mod, in there. So the template does the installation task for you, and we verified that by building this one. The next thing to do is to actually write our mod code. The template is nice enough to give you a good enough starting point as a boilerplate, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the documentation and just copy the example there. I'll just select all my template generated code and paste my documentation code. Now, the moment I do that, you will see that there is this red squiggly line and an error. Here, it's a very simple error in the documentation itself, which I'll need to correct at some point. You just need to add a semicolon here. And once you do, Visual Studio is happy, it's no longer screaming at you, and you should be able to build the solution again. And now you'll have no indication that this is actually updated, except comparing the date modified time with the system time to make sure that it's actually the build is created. And so now that we have the mod built and installed into our game, we're going to run our game and see if the mod is installed. So let's do Hollow Knight, play, and start Hollow Knight for us. In the meantime, while it decides to start, we can look at what the mod actually does. So since this is a very simple mod, all it does is on every single frame that the hero exists, which is the knight, exists in the game, it's going to check if the key O is pressed, that it is down specifically, that the keyboard key is down. And if it is, then it's going to put into the mod log that the key is pressed. You're going to see something like this. In the top left, you'll see the name of your mod and its version. Both of these things you defined in your mod. Under the getName function, you define the name of your mod that will show up in the game. And under getVersion function, you return the string, which is going to be the version string for your mod. Uh, but for our case, that doesn't really matter. We're just going to have it be version 1. And so the mod is running. Now we start the game. We'll just go to an existing save, skip the cutscenes. And we now have our knight. So we're going to press O on the keyboard a couple of times. You might think nothing happened. That's because nothing did. Except if you go back into your saves directory and open modlock.txt file and scroll a bunch in it, you will see my first mod, key pressed, has been logged here, and key pressed is exactly the text that we logged here. And so clearly this works. Now, obviously, this is very simple mod, which just explains that your code ran. But in a more complex mod, if you do log something, you don't want to have to open a separate file and see that the log has come up. The modding API has a solution for that, which is you go to your saves file, you look for the file known as modding API.globalsettings.json. You open this file. Now, if you edit anything in this now, it's not actually going to save. The first thing you do is you close your game, right? Which I should just do for the sake of completion. So the game's closed now. If you will see, the file got modified at 12:30 a.m., which is exactly now, which means the moment you close the game, the file will get modified. So don't try to edit it while the game is running. Otherwise, all your changes will be lost. So next thing you do is you open this file, you look for show debug log in game and set that to true. Once you set this to true, the mod log will also show up in your game, kind of. So just do that. You will have this set to false. You come here, you make it true, and you save this file. Then all you gotta do is you gotta run Hollow Knight again. Again, you will see this screen. What you do next is you press F10, and that's what brings up this text here. This is actually the mod log itself, just printed out on your screen as you play the game. So now if we enter the scene, and then we press O on the keyboard, you can see key pressed written on the screen itself. You don't have to switch out and open another text file to see it. So that's basically all you need to make your first Hollow Knight mod. Obviously, we got to go over what this code actually does now. So now that we know how to set up the template, how to get the code to execute, how to actually see the logs in the game itself, let's actually go through this code. Let's just talk about the files that you will get when you uh, create a new mod with your template, right? So this is all you get, very bare bones. Um, and if you see the directory itself, you get a little bit more than that, but not a lot, right? This is all that gets generated if you have a mod that is generated with the template and then build at least once. Uh, the files that we care about right now are the csproj, the .cs files, the .md, and the .getignore. These are the files we care about. The directories in the solution file can be ignored. Okay, so the csproj is the file that tells the C# compiler about this project. In here is where your mod's name, description, which libraries it's going to use, and what other files it has are defined. Okay? So this is basically your main project file itself. You usually don't have to edit it, especially since this template exists. You just need to change the path to your Hollow Knight installation and where you want the exported mod to go. But you should know the purpose of this file, right? Then we will move on to the .cs file. This is the file that we edited here. This is where majority of your code is right now for this specific mod. Uh, it's basically just a C# file. You can have multiple of those. It's recommended to have multiple of those if you know your mod is bigger. And the general rule to go by is if you're creating a new C# class, you create a new .cs file. Uh, Sometimes, if you have a really big class, then you can break that individual file into multiple files as well. But as a beginner, as a basic rule of thumb, you can just say, if you're creating a new class, make a new .cs file, and you should be good with that much. Then we get to the other files, right? So the next file is readme.md. So if I'm not wrong, right now, this should not have a lot, right? This is the placeholder text that the template provides for you. The idea of readme.md is if you do distribute your mod, people should know what to do with that file and what the mod does, who made it, all that kind of stuff. So you can just put that in here. It's the file format is Markdown file format, very readable even as a text, and it can also serve as a rich text. That's why we usually use Markdown format for stuff like this. So that's what all the files that you have over here do. Now let's get into the actual code. So going through the sections, the first section is the using section, which is the section that tells the C# compiler to sort of treat the types that you'll use in your code as if they're uh, already here. So basically, what happens is you have a namespace, Unity Engine. Inside that, you will have something like input, right? Input is a class inside Unity Engine. Now, if I remove this Unity Engine using Unity Engine, now my C# compiler doesn't know where input comes from. What I can do then is I can write Unity Engine.input.keydown, that works. Unity Engine.keycode, and that works. But you can see that I'm having to repeat and tell the C# compiler every single time, oh, input comes from Unity Engine, oh, keycode comes from Unity Engine. And if you have a really big mod, then you'll repeat that many times. So the solution there is just tell C Sharp compiler that everything that's inside Unity engine, assume that I'm going to use it from there, right? And that's how when you write input, C Sharp compiler just goes and checks all these places. And it's like, okay, Unity engine has something known as input, so I'll just use input from Unity engine. Uh, this can also trip you up in some cases where you try to use object. Okay. In this case, C Sharp compiler says that it's an ambiguous reference between Unity engine.object and object. So what does that mean? Basically, object is now something that's defined in system, which is the core C Sharp, and Unity engine. Since it's defined in both of them, the compiler doesn't know what to do with it, where to get this object from. So one simple solution there is, again, you can just explicitly write that you want to load it uh, from Unity engine. So what you can do in such a case is write using uObject equals to Unity engine dot object. Now you can just use uObject instead of object here, and the C Sharp compiler now knows that uObject means use the object class inside Unity engine. So you can use both of these. I prefer to just explicitly define Unity engine uh, in the few places that I actually end up needing it. That's that's the first section, the using section. It's there simply to tell the compiler where to look for the stuff you use, so that you don't have to keep telling it every single time. The next section is the namespace. Uh, Basically, it's the collection of a few classes or types. Um, you can usually name it whatever you want, as long as it's a valid C sharp identifier. Um, that's all I have to really say about that. I'm not a C sharp expert, but the next part is the actual fun part, which is the main mod class. And you know that it's the mod class because it has this at the end of its name. Uh, what this means is that my first mod, this class, is extending, or in this case, implementing the mod class, right? So the mod class is what the modding API provides for you, and that's where a lot of the functionality that the modding API is going to give you is going to come from. It's also going to be the class that the modding API is going to load. You can think of this as the entry point of your mod. So obviously the documentation that I have here goes into a lot of depth in what all of these individual methods and lines do. But fundamentally, this class is what is going to give your mod life. Without this, without at least one class extending the mod class, your mod is not going to function as a mod. It can serve as a library, but not as a mod. Okay. So the next thing is the get name and get version. We already went over these. This basically sets the name in what's going to appear in game and the version that's going to appear in game. Then there is the initialize method, which is a method that the modding API calls for you to tell you that all the mods in the game have now been constructed, and you can now start actually working on your code, whatever you want to do. In that, you'll see something known as a Modhook, which is you can think of it as events that modding API notifies you about. So in this case, the Modhook is hero update hook, which is basically the update function on the hero controller. Every single time that it runs, you will get an event. It runs basically every frame, once every frame. So you'll get to run this function, hero update, on hero update, once every frame. That's what this means. So now, this one's pretty easy, but you might want to write a different mod hook, one that takes some parameters. So one way to do that is you can just type mod hooks dot, and Visual Studio will show you all the things that it has. So we're just going to go and see what enemy enable hook does, right? Uh, so this is what is going to this event is going to be fired every single time a new enemy is enabled in the game. That's equal to, and Visual Studio will suggest that you should press tab to insert something. You press tab and Visual Studio will generate the function that you need um, to receive this event. So with this enabled hook, you get two things. First parameter that you receive is the enemy game object itself. Uh, and the second parameter is a boolean that tells you whether the enemy is already dead or not. Now, using this information, you can do whatever you need to with that enemy. So what we're going to do is we're just going to log the name of the enemy, found enemy dot name, and we'll just print if the enemy is dead or not. Enemy is, and so with C sharp, you can't actually use single quotes to define a string. Single quotes only work for single character, and so you have to use double quotes to define a string. And so I've done that. Now you'll see that the function is underlined in red, and there is an error here. So let's just walk through what that is. The error is not all code paths return a value. So if you look at the function definition, you'll see that it says private bool and then the function name. If you compare that with the onHero update, it says public void onHero update. So basically, void means that this function is not going to return anything. Bool means that this function needs to return a boolean. So I already know that this mod hook requires you to return the is already dead, but I'm going to double check just in case. This hook in my code, uh, some mod must use it. Okay, HKMP uses it. So in that code, HKMP returns is dead. So that's how I know that I'm going to have to return this, and no more errors. The code will work. So I have the few mods that I work on in a single directory because that then allows me to search through all of them. So if at any point I need some code that I have already written and I've already seen, I can just search here for what I need and it will usually come up. Uh, it's helpful in remembering syntax when you don't always want to Google. Of course, if you need to Google, you can Google, and that also works. So now let's just run this code that we've written here. So we do a build solution, says build succeeded here. We'll go in our exports folder. You'll see it says 12:52. That's the current time. So the build has definitely succeeded. We'll now run the game again, and hopefully every single time we find an enemy, we'll see this log. So now we'll just see if it prints out that it found. I do not see the log, at least not in the middle of all my other logs. And what we'll do is we'll just go here and look at the modlog.txt. So one quick tip here is you can search for the name of your mod and it will show you the logs only from that mod. So if you see here now, when we were in the room before the Hollow Knight fight, it found the hollow shade, which is the shade, and the shade was alive at that point in time. Similarly, if you see the next one, it found the Hollow Knight boss and the enemy was alive at that point in time. So that's to demonstrate that the enemy enable hook works and it works as expected. So there's more such hooks that you can look up and use. If you don't want to use Visual Studio to get the hooks directly, you can go to radiance.host and that should get you to a guide which is all the hooks. There's also some on the 1.5 documentation. 1.5 documentation, however, is not as thorough because a lot of the hooks are already explained uh, in the radiance.host and we didn't feel like repeating all the hooks here. So that is. It also goes a little bit more in depth with what we did here, but fundamentally, that's what the hooks are. Let's go to modern docs just to see the hooks once. Hooray! So if this is the 1.4 Hollow Knight modding documentation. Most of it is still relevant, especially the hooks itself. The only thing that changes is instead of doing modhooks.instance dot hook name, you just do modhooks.instance. And there are a few changes to certain hooks, but overall, this is still a very good reference. So if you see the enemy enable hook, so this is exactly what it does. It tells you a small description of what the enemy of what this hook does, and it gives you the snippet of the code. Uh, it does similar thing for all the hooks. You can sort of look at them. Uh, in our case, we also discussed the hero update hook. So that's this. But yeah, more or less, this is all you need as a beginner to start creating mods.